The year is 1212. Across the fields and villages of Europe, a strange and unbelievable phenomenon is occurring. It is not an army of knights in shining armor, nor a royal procession of kings and nobles. It is a different kind of army, an army of the most unlikely crusaders imaginable. From the Rhineland of Germany and the countryside of France, they emerge, tens of thousands of them, mostly peasants, the poor, and most shockingly, a vast number of children. Some are adolescents, some are barely old enough to walk. They pour out of their villages, leaving behind their homes and their families. They carry makeshift wooden crosses, tattered banners, and a fervent, unshakable belief in their hearts. They are marching south. Their destination is Jerusalem. Their goal is the Holy Land. But they carry no swords, no shields, no siege engines. Their only weapon is their faith. They have been told by their charismatic young leaders that their purity and innocence alone will achieve what decades of bloody warfare, led by sinful kings and brutal knights, could not. They believe that upon reaching the Mediterranean Sea, God will part the waters for them, allowing them to walk to the Holy Land on dry ground. They believe they will not fight the Saracens, but peacefully convert them to Christianity through the sheer power of their devotion. It is a beautiful, naive, and utterly impossible dream. This is the story of the Children's Crusade, a moment in history so bizarre and so tragic it feels more like a dark fairy tale. What power, what belief, what madness could possess tens of thousands of children to abandon their homes and embark on a suicidal quest? Was this a genuine moment of divine calling, a mass expression of pure faith? Or was it a terrifying wave of social hysteria, a delusion that would lead an entire generation not to glory, but to their doom? To understand how such a bizarre movement could even be possible, we must first step into the world of 13th century Europe. This was not our world. This was a world steeped in a faith so intense and all-encompassing that it bordered on hysteria. For the common person, life was short, brutal, and filled with suffering. The promise of heaven was the only solace in a world of famine, plague, and war. Miracles were not just possible, they were expected. Divine signs were seen in every sunset, and demonic temptations in every shadow. This intense faith had been focused for over a century on one all-consuming goal: the liberation of the Holy Land. The Crusades had dominated the political and religious landscape, but by 1212, the great crusades of kings and emperors had largely failed. The First Crusade had captured Jerusalem, but it was lost again. The Third Crusade, led by figures like Richard the Lionheart, had ended in a stalemate. The Fourth Crusade, just a few years earlier, had been a catastrophic disaster, never even reaching the Holy Land, and instead resulting in the brutal sack of the Christian city of Constantinople. There was a deep and growing sense of disillusionment among the common people. They believed the crusades of the nobility had failed for a simple reason: sin. The knights were greedy, the kings were arrogant, and their armies were filled with violence and vice. Their hearts were not pure, and so God had denied them victory. Out of this disillusionment, a powerful new idea began to take hold. spreading through the sermons of wandering preachers and popular religious movements. It was the idea of holy poverty, the belief that true holiness, true power in the eyes of God, was found not in wealth and armor, but in humility, innocence, and the purity of the poor. The Bible itself said, "The meek shall inherit the earth." A new narrative began to form in the collective consciousness of the European peasantry. If the strong and sinful have failed, then perhaps God will grant victory to the weak and the pure. And who, in all the world, was more pure, more innocent, more blessed in the eyes of God than a child? This was the fertile ground upon which the children's crusade would grow. It was not just a random event. It was the culmination of over a century of failed wars, religious fervor, and a desperate belief that a miracle was needed. The people were primed to believe that a new kind of army, an army of the pure, could succeed where all others had failed. They were waiting for a sign, a leader, a prophet to show them the way. And in the spring of 1212, into different parts of Europe, those prophets, who were themselves little more than children, emerged. The spark was lit in the spring of 1212, and it came as the prophecies seemed to demand. From the humblest of sources, our first story begins in the German Rhineland, with a young shepherd boy named Nicholas of Cologne. According to the Chronicles, Nicholas began to preach in the streets and fields, claiming he had been visited by an angel. The message was simple and electrifying. It was not up to kings and knights to save Jerusalem. It was up to the children. Nicholas proclaimed that he would lead a peaceful army of the pure to the Mediterranean Sea. When they arrived, he promised God would perform a great miracle, parting the waters just as he had for Moses, allowing them to walk across the seabed all the way to the Holy Land. There, they would peacefully convert the Muslims and reclaim the holy city without a single drop of blood. His charisma was magnetic. His message tapped directly into the desperate faith of the era. A vast, disorganized horde began to form around him. Chroniclers described a following of 20,000, perhaps even 50,000 people, while a great many were children and adolescents, drawn to the adventure and the divine calling. They were joined by thousands of the landless poor, disillusioned peasants, and opportunistic vagrants. It was an army of the dispossessed, with Nicholas at its head. This great river of humanity began to march south. Their journey was an ordeal. They had no supplies, no organization, and no real plan beyond Nicholas's divine promise. They marched through Germany, their numbers swelling as they went. They begged for food in the towns they passed, but their welcome soon wore thin as they began the arduous trek over the Alps into Italy. The true horror began. The freezing mountain passes and the lack of food took a brutal toll. Thousands died from starvation, disease, and exposure, their bodies left behind on the frozen mountain paths. Yet the faithful core, driven by the unwavering belief in Nicholas's vision, pressed on. At the very same time, a second, independent movement was exploding in France. Its leader was another shepherd boy, Stephen of Cloyes. Stephen's story was slightly different. He claimed that one day, while tending his flock, a stranger had appeared to him. The stranger revealed himself to be Jesus Christ, and he had given Stephen a letter to be delivered personally to the King of France. Like Nicholas, Stephen was a charismatic preacher. He performed what many believed to be miracles, and soon a massive crowd began to follow him. An estimated 30,000 people again, a mix of adolescents, children, and the adult poor marched with him from his village to the gates of Paris. He gained an audience with King Philip II and presented his divine letter. The king, a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, was unimpressed. He consulted with the University of Paris and then wisely ordered the foolish boy and his followers to go home. For many, the king's command was enough, but a large, zealous contingent remained loyal to Stephen. They were undeterred. If the king would not help them, they believed God would provide another way. Stephen, filled with a sense of divine purpose, declared that they would continue their march. They would go south to the great port city of Marseille. He did not know what would happen when they got there, but he was certain that God would reveal the next step of their holy mission. After a brutal journey that had already claimed thousands of lives, the depleted German crusade under Nicholas of Cologne finally descended from the Alps and arrived at the great port city of Genoa. In August 1212, they were a pitiful sight, starving, ragged, and exhausted, but still clinging to the promise that had led them this far. They marched to the coast, stood before the waves, and waited for the miracle. They waited for the sea to part. It never did. The Mediterranean remained stubbornly in place. For the followers of Nicholas, this was a moment of devastating, soul-crushing disillusionment. The divine promise that had been their armor against starvation and exhaustion was broken. The city of Genoa, both impressed by their faith and terrified of this starving horde, agreed to offer citizenship to any who wished to stay. Many did, their crusade ending not in Jerusalem, but in the back alleys of an Italian port city. The movement shattered. A smaller, still loyal contingent followed Nicholas to the nearby city of Pisa. There, according to one account, the ships offered them passage. They were taken to Sardinia, and the children were sold into slavery. It was a dark foreshadowing of what was to come. Nicholas himself, with the last remnant of his followers, continued all the way to Rome. There, he was granted an audience with Pope Innocent III. The Pope, while praising their zeal, gently but firmly absolved the children of their crusading vows and commanded them to return home. For the few who had made it this far, the crusade was officially over, but their ordeal was not. They now had to recross the Alps to get home. Few, if any, ever completed the journey. Nicholas himself simply vanishes from the historical record, his fate unknown. Meanwhile, Stephen of Cloyes and his thousands of French followers had reached their own destination, the bustling port of Marseille. Like Nicholas's group, they stood before the sea, waiting for a miracle, and in a way, they thought they had received one. Till local merchants came forward, offering to help the pious crusaders. Their names, recorded in the Chronicles with grim irony, were Hugh the Iron and William the Pig. They announced that, for the glory of God, they would provide ships to transport all the children to the Holy Land, completely free of charge. To the exhausted followers, it was a sign, a reward for their faith. 7 ships were filled with thousands of ecstatic children, their dream finally within reach. The fleet set sail, But a few days into their journey, they were hit by a violent storm off the coast of Sardinia. 2 of the ships were smashed against the rocks, killing every single person aboard. The remaining 5 ships sailed on, but their destination was not the Holy Land. Hugh the Iron and William the Pig were not philanthropists. They were slave traders. The 5 ships sailed directly to the ports of North Africa, in Algiers and in Alexandria, Egypt. The thousands of French children who had marched south in the name of God were unloaded onto the docks and sold in the open market to Saracen buyers. The crusade had ended not in conversion, but in chains. It was the ultimate betrayal. The story of the children's crusade is so strange, so filled with horror and pathos, that it seems to belong more to the realm of myth than history. And for centuries, that is how it was treated. But what is the truth behind this incredible event? Modern historians have cast a critical eye on the Chronicles, and their findings have revealed a more complex, though no less tragic, picture. The key lies in a single Latin word used by the medieval chroniclers to describe the participants: pueri. For centuries, this was translated literally as boys or children, but the word pueri in medieval society could also be used more broadly to refer to the poor, the landless, the disenfranchised, the wandering poor who had no stake in society. Many historians now believe that the Children's Crusade was not, in fact, an army composed primarily of literal children. Instead, it was a massive, unauthorized social and religious pilgrimage of the pueri, the rural poor of all ages who had been left behind by society. They were men, women, the elderly, and yes, many adolescents and children mixed within their ranks. This reinterpretation doesn't lessen the tragedy, it reframes it. It becomes the story of a desperate peasant revolt, a mass movement of the dispossessed, who, having nothing to lose on earth, gambled everything on a miracle. But the memory of the event, passed down through generations, held onto the most shocking element, the children. And it is here that the crusade casts its longest and darkest shadow. Many scholars believe the German crusade, led by Nicholas of Cologne, is the direct historical origin of one of the most famous and sinister fairy tales ever told, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Consider the parallels. A charismatic figure appears and, through a mysterious power, convinces all the children of a German town to follow him. He leads them away on a long journey, and they are never seen again. In the legend, the children are led into a mountain. In history, they were led over the Alps. In both stories, a generation is lost. It is highly likely that the collective trauma of Nicholas's crusade, an event where thousands of German children marched away and vanished from history, was condensed and transformed over the centuries into the dark folktale we know today. In the end, whether it was an army of children or an army of the destitute, the story of the Children's Crusade serves as a terrifying monument to the dangers of blind faith and the cruel reality of a world that preys on the desperate. It is a chronicle of how a beautiful, divine dream of peacefully reclaiming paradise led thousands of true believers on a march, not to the gates of Jerusalem, but into a very real and unforgiving hell on earth. A charismatic leader, a divine promise, and an army of the desperate led to their doom. If you believe we must study history's darkest chapters to understand the dangers of our own time, subscribe to the Black Chronicle and activate notifications. We have a question for you. What is more dangerous, the con man who preys on faith, or the faith that creates the con man? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.